Greetings to those of you who are tuning in, audio or video on YouTube. Thanks for paying that kind of attention. And again, a welcome to the entire assembly here, and also to any who may be tuning in on live stream in places around campus. We have plenty of room. Come down. My subject today is linked to a single word, as most of them are. The word for the day for me is reconciliation. And reconciliation entered into the series of chapel topics because of training and readings and experiences that I've had. And now, having made cycles through these topics so many times, my problem is too much material, not too little to say. So I'm trying to tighten it in and focus on what I feel called to say this morning. The meaning of the word for the Latinists in the room is coming back together, and the suggestion then is apartness that we suffer. And the thing that helps focus all these grandiose theological and philosophical topics of the chapel service is the phenomenon of addiction. And addiction and apartness are very connected. In fact, I've known people who've described addiction as disconnection. I prefer to say it's misconnection. But in any case, in the profound attachment that the person who is addicted has to their substance or behavior, those who want connection with them experience loss in that relationship, even to the ultimate of suicide or overdose. And so reconciliation, the coming back together, for the persons who are affected by addiction is a central issue. And it's not simple. I'm already going to depart from my mental outline, but who cares? So one of the things I think about with regards to reconciliation or forgiveness is usually a piece of it, right? A lot of times how we get apart is from some embitterment. And if you haven't thought about it, embitterment seems to be like so deeply intrinsically involved in the human experience that I could pull way back from like the Spartans and the Greek and Romans, or the Hatfields and McCoys in American lore, or the Montagues and the Capulets and the Shakespearean idiom, or just turn on the news and today we have Russia and the Ukraine, and we have the Hamas-Israeli conflict, and we have our fears about China and Taiwan. I don't believe that there is a time in human society when, if you took a global perspective, you could say that peace reigned on the earth. And it's so sad, right? Because I'm inherently oriented towards pacifism, and yet I can scrap, I think it's in us, and it's tragically in us, and often it's attached to religious narratives, although good political and social scientists point out that the religious narrative that overlays most political drama is a false narrative, because usually the fights are really about land or money, about resources. So, we have this tiny little piece of the great planet Earth, the Middle East and Israel and Jerusalem and Gaza, that has suffered these incredible, conflicts for so long. It's impossible to wonder what it would be like if we could get to some sort of extended resolution of those things. And now I need to pull myself back here. So, the other thing I was going to veer off to was one of the places I think I learn about forgiveness is from children and pets. And the behavioral scientists, if there are any in the room, I know, there's a camp that says that when the dog looks like it's feeling shame, it isn't feeling shame, it's just an active behavior. I don't believe that, sorry. Because I feel empathic connection with the cat and the dog, which are our principal mammals that we bring into our homes, and these extended relationships. And I have to tell you, I know when my cat's pissed off, right? And she's a bit of a grudge holder, but eventually she comes back, right? And sometimes it's tentative, but it's like, I'm still pissed at you, but I want to sit on your lap. And there's a lesson in there, as there is with the 4-year-old or whatever, about becoming And anger is a somatic experience as well as a conceptual thing. And it's a response in us instinctual to injury. So when we feel injured or perceive the threat of injury, we can manifest this like fight response and heated engagement. And if we've been injured, we can seek, and there are things like revenge or punitive, retaliatory kinds of stuff that come up in us. And they come up in us that kind of organic, anthropological, organismic, animalistic way. I think it's so interesting to read. I appreciate the high-mindedness of people who are like, I need to transcend all that stuff and get to a place of no resentment. I'm like, good luck, because your biology does this. It's not just a conceptual thing. It's an instinctual, animalistic, fundamental response. And if we had angered ourselves for our anger, that's a bad shame spiral. So, but managing that response, or navigating it, managing is again too controlling, navigating it skillfully, to use the Buddhist term, is what I think amounts to emotional, wisdom and maturity. And I've not been good at it. I've been anger avoidant for most of my life. And I've come to realize from doing the kind of homework that it came from my family of origin, where there were bigger people who, when their anger scared the crap out of me. So I've had to acquiesce to the reality that I want to be a pacifist, because I really hated getting beat up. So, but that doesn't mean I don't find a certain nobility in the case for pacifism and in the case for relinquishment of the expectation of just reward, like that sort of revenge or whatever. I'm not a big fan of that, even though, like I said, I may come by it from my pain. But when the cat or the dog comes back on your lap, you might think they've forgotten, because it's almost as if the moment is gone. It's kind of beautiful. But one of the things I realized in thinking about this is that they actually don't forget. But I had an animal in my life. It was actually my mom's dog. But this dog would respond all the years. This dog became fat and happy. We acquired it from a humane society, whatever. And this dog, at the beginning of its journey, was like scrawny and clearly had not had a good previous epic of its journey. But Pepper was her name, a schnoodle, and she was just so freaking spoiled. And she knew it. She would like wallow around and treats and all that sort of stuff. And my mother took incredibly good care of Pepper, because there was that part of her that was a giver and a mom and all that sort of stuff. And we were all, she was empty nested, and so Pepper benefited from her caring nature. But the reason I bring Pepper up to the table is that when a bearded male would come in the house, Pepper would go into trauma. And that tells me that the animal remembers, right? So even though Pepper exhibited a kind of reconciliation and a peacefulness, until there was a stimulus in the environment that caused the animal to recall. And I know not all bearded males are to be feared, and she didn't know that, right? So she was having an instinctual kind of response. This is like us going to an IMAX movie theater and we have the and in fact the thing's not coming at you if you're wearing the 3D glasses, right? It's a natural response. But memory plays a piece in the negotiation of response to conflict. And forgive and forget. I know it's already 2 F's. I'm going to say a third one. Forget that. Forgive and forget is not how this actually, I think, works. In fact, I would caution the person who's a victim of trauma to set for themselves an aspiration of forgetting, right? Because memory is a gift from God. And it's in the remembering that we can find the wisdom to renegotiate boundaries and protect ourselves and others better. But if we are ruminating on the memory in a horrible way that torments us, right? And there's some inner child tantrum going on, then this is the counterpart of it. This is one of the challenges of this subject area, is I don't think it's binary in any way. There's no simple answers to the negotiation of these things. But if we are being still tormented because somebody else has hurt us, and they've gone on and they're living their own lives, right? And they're not tormented by the injury that they inflict on us. The adage that you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous sometimes is a resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person's going to die. Because you were still sort of consuming the hurt and injury, and the world of the perpetrator has moved on. So this is where finding some relief is not just about the justice making with other people, but it's also a way of finding peace in ourselves. And I think the real aspiration that I have for reconciliation, forgiveness is not like, oh, let's make a happy world with everybody, although I can sing that song. But it's also because I don't want to go about my life broiling and ruminating and being stirred by the things of the past. And interestingly, some of the things of the past, some of the injuries I thought I suffered have actually been incredible gifts. So it's like, it's kind of funny, like the moral judgment piece, it's really tricky because the crap that people did to me did make me stronger and give me an education and all that sort of stuff. So, but when I stay in the judgment and the resentment and the revenge narrative, I'm not really able to find that educational harvest from it. So, yeah, way off. But two things I wanted to point out. One is that, interestingly, tomorrow begins the Jewish observance of Passover. And it's like quite long separated from Easter. I think it's interesting that it's, this might be one of the longest intervals between Passover and Easter that we find. Some years Passover and Easter line right up on top of each other. But Passover is a great narrative to bring to the subject matter of reconciliation because it has these dynamics of injury and these dynamics of memory. And it has a third dynamic that I want to also bring to the Seder table. So for those who may not be well educated about Judaism, I had a rabbi who used to tell me, the essence of Jewish prayer is they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. And there's another thing I say when David in his opening music talked about grief as something that human beings experience. I think injury is another thing that we all experience, but not everybody experiences it in the same amount. Some people really get more injured than others. I think that's more self-evident even on the grief thing. Grief is not doled out fairly and equitably, and suffering is not doled out equitably and fairly. It's not hard to figure that out. Some people really suffer way more than others. But, and the reason I say that is that as a people, the children of Abraham, or the Israelites, have a case to make that they have been perennially persecuted. And there's, in the studies these days about intergenerational trauma, sometimes Jewish communities are used to bring evidence to the table of how the children of Jewish parents and Jewish grandparents inherit things that may go back to Holocaust experience or whatever. And if you read the Jewish scriptures, it's just like, and the Middle Eastern sort of thing. And there are other people who suffered in the Middle East, so I don't mean to exclude, either the Christian Catholic voices that are in that, and certainly the Muslim voices. So it's been a horror story for a lot of peoples over a long period of time. But Judaism comes into focus because tomorrow's Passover, and the highest holidays of the Jewish tradition are the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But this is almost like Christmas and Easter. Passover is a close second. It's the holiday that a Jewish person travels home for. They go home for that. It's a communal centerpiece, and there's this meal that you have in a script that goes with the meal, the Haggadah, and in the opening of the Haggadah there are key questions, and one of the questions that opens the Haggadah is, why is this night more important than any other night? And the reason is, we will never forget that God brought us out of captivity. So it's not we will never forget those jerks in Egypt, it's that we will never forget that we were rescued, that we will never forget that in spite of the suffering, there was healing that came, which is an important piece of the story, I think, to remember that it's actually a positive narrative and not a retribution-laden narrative. But the other piece of, so the never forget thing I really appreciate. The idea of the sacred being in there. And then the other thing I think is so beautiful about the Seder is that it's a family festival, right? And you invite a stranger, and I mean, it's an inherently communal thing. This meal can go on for hours. It's usually done imperfectly, and then that's part of like the laughter. It's like, oh, you just got the question wrong or whatever, and we keep moving on. And yes, there's wine's a part of it, I know, but many families in recovery do it with grape juice, basically. And you'll see it in the grocery stores. You see the grape juice that's sold cotton or something like that. Anyway, and you can do recovery and holidays without alcohol, by the way, and all these different traditions, and they're arguably, I think, better because there's no puking in the Christmas tree. So that's an important thing for us to teach, is practical things about, because I think a lot of people come here and they're like, what are we going to do? How can I have crabs and not have beer? So it can be done, and it can be better. It can be better. So one thing I really did want to talk about also was what I've come to learn for myself is how I think about the mechanics of forgiveness and reconciliation, because I think it's often misrepresented as a binary issue. Like, just let go, just move on. And I think forgiveness and reconciliation are way more complicated than that. And I think like one of the great teaching moments in human history was the South African community for the way that they worked with coming out of apartheid. And there's some beautiful writings on the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which came out of that. And one of the things I think is interesting, so there's three things that to me frame the movement out of injury and into a healed state with regards to this kind of suffering. And I should take a nod to the 4th and 9th steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, is where you deal with this in the 12-step frame. So in the 4th step, the person is using those steps to help them forge their path out of captivity. Oh, that's the other thing, I didn't even say that. The great reason why Passover plays for us is that most of us have been captive. And we could remember being released to freedom. So I'm so amused by how many people think of freedom as jail. But this isn't jail, this is liberation. This is the beginning of freedom. And it's like our sober anniversary should be Seder meals. We should come up with some sort of like, what should we remember on the night and should be welcomed in rehab, right? That's the freeing expression of how it begins for so many. So the three pieces of reconciliation for me are analytical, subjective, and vocational. The analytical is where a lot of people reduce forgiveness to the analytical. This is the bean counter. This is you took this from me and I want it back. Or there's an accident and we want damages, right? We want damages to be paid. And that's an interesting conception, because if your car gets wrecked, yes, you can measure how much it costs to replace the car. But if your heart gets, injured, how much is that worth? It's a really fuzzy thing. And there have been several assessments of huge damages in the news over, and I'm not taking a political position, but of amounts that people just actually cannot pay, and then they pay some lesser sum. And what happens is, you've all experienced this. I remember my parents doing this. They would tell me, you have to pay this back, and I would pay back one piece of it, and they said, you're done, right? The forgiveness of some analytical piece is often the path forward for resolution out of an injurious adversarial dynamic. And this happened all the time in South Africa. Like the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, how could you compensate for generations of apartheid? No way. But the suffering voices in those communities said, if you will just acknowledge the harm, that's what we really want. We want the truth to be told of what happened. And then we can talk about moving forward. But until there's an admission of this crap that's going on, and so that's an interesting equation of truth-telling with harm, because secret keeping is there, the harm. So I think bringing it into the light, and one of the powerful things about forgiveness, to me, is when you have the recognition that the injured and the perpetrator have choices. And the giving yourself back of choice is a huge thing. Like, to realize I don't necessarily have to stay in relationship with this perpetrator. And the perpetrator can say, I really don't have to meet the demands of the sufferer, right? And I've been both. I have perpetrated harm, and I have suffered harm. And I have experienced people forgiving what I thought I owed them back, and I have forgiven people stuff that I thought they owed me back. And this, the capacity to choose, is a gift. Instead of feeling like I'm frozen in whatever is the dynamic as I assess it at the moment. So one way of finding healing is just realizing that you can choose what you're going to do here and where you're going to go. But so one of the obstacles to feeling a sense of healing is when you're stuck on the how much, when, and how many. And until you can find a resolution of that, healing is impaired or pending. But another thing on the other side of the brain, the left side of the brain is an analytical, is the like bean counting side. On the subjective side of the brain, another form of healing is relational. This is when you decide whether or not you're going to be hunky-dory with the previous person who's injured you. And I don't think that's a simple thing either, because I think in families, like I'm talking about me and my wife, right? Like, I'm so committed to my marriage that I know I have to figure out how to get back to harmony. And I didn't get that as a young married person in my first marriage, and I don't know that my first wife did either. She's now passed away, but it's really powerful, I think, to realize I have a choice. I have a choice about how I want to reconfigure a relationship as part of my journey of healing after injury. And this becomes important too if the person that injured me is deceased. Because I still have that choice. I can still kind of put them in the cloud of witnesses that I see as now in my champions. I just talked to this woman in a recovery meeting the other day, and she has an amazing story. And she's 77, and when she was younger, like 60, I'll call that younger, being nice to myself. Her husband passed away and left her in a shambles. The money situation was awful. Like, there were all these secrets and everything. And she lost everything. She lost the home that they'd been in. She lost everything. So she would have a reason to be embittered still. 17 years later. But what she said was, you know what I found out? My husband's smarter and nicer dead than he ever was alive. And I'm like, wow, that is so awesome, right? Because even if it's wish fulfillment, I also kind of believe that. Because here's my afterlife thing, is that the ugly in us can't persist, and that we are somehow purified. If there is some part of us that persists beyond death, it won't be the gross, awful part. Which, I'm sorry, you have some of you, and maybe small, but it's really gross and awful. So this is, I can even reconfigure my sense of relationship with people who have injured me that have passed on. And it's really okay to let go. That's another thing I've learned from my wife. She's really good at, like, I'm done with you. Out. And I think I didn't get it. I thought I had to, like, make harmony with everybody all the time. I was incorrect. And thank you, Judy. I know she doesn't usually listen, but so I have choice there to how to reconfigure the relationship. And if I can find some dynamic of peace within myself about the analytical, and some dynamic of peace within myself about where I see us in relationship with one another, and we've been in this, or either I was perpetrator or I was victim, I don't like that word, but harmed or the agent of harm. Then I have the capacity to step into the next piece of my life and not feel like I'm stuck in that loop of injury or injury. And I think this is like really good news, because it doesn't mean everybody has to kiss and make up. It doesn't mean that you can't kiss and make up. It does not mean that we forget, but it means that there is a way forward. And I also think it's lovely and powerful to realize that the recovery tradition, first and earliest and most of the 12-step tradition, the Buddhists would also say, and the Judaism and the Abrahamic traditions, find God as a piece of this, and that we reconcile ourselves to the God of our understanding, because it's really easy to get this off of God. by the way. And man, if you live that way, that's a tough thing. To be in schism with the whatever you conceive as the ultimate. It's a profound form of aloneness. So I need to finish up. The invitation of the message for today is an invitation where you have the capacity of choice to take stock of how you are and who and what you become separated from, and to begin to ask your questions about these things. What do I really need either to give or to get in order to move forward? What could I sacrifice and say I don't really need that $100 back or whatever it is, or the thousands of dollars, whatever it is, because I could free myself in just letting that go. And as I let that go, what are the terms in which I would then see the dynamics of me with this other party or institution or thing or transcendent reality? How would I choose to see us, the me and the other, even if it's myself? How would I choose that? And am I ready to then free myself so that I'm not waking up in the middle of the night still going over this thing? If you are brand new here, I'm talking about what happens down the road. Although we do family work, and sometimes there's amazing healing that happens really quickly, but I would just caution you to not. We have a 5-year celebrant, and in recovery terms, many people said not only do you get your brains back in 5 years, and not a whole lot sooner, but this recovery journey takes a significant amount of time. It really does. It takes a lot of time. And the emotional repair and the gaining of these emotional competencies that I like to speak of here, sometimes people remind me, like, Jack, that was a great message, but it's like way over or way ahead of where people really are. And I think that when people come back to chapel and the families are here, one of the things that's funny about this is, sadly, there is a dynamic where a lot of our clients, the patients with the wristbands, have been injuring, and a lot of the family members who come here have been the injured party. So, and it's a hard thing to try and flip that and make it balance. I'm sorry, it's just basically true. The addict doesn't do it on purpose. We don't do it on purpose. We don't wake up in the morning, and our parents don't wake up, or our loved ones don't wake up and go, how can I screw up, my son today? Everybody has good intentions. But the loss of the capacity to choose not to use is taken from the addict. And people get harmed by it. Not because we willingly harm, but because we cannot will ourselves to stop that which is harmful until we get the right amount of help and support. And now in waking up with this new freedom, when the capacity of choice is given back, which is a huge gift, then the mature thing is to say, who has suffered as a result of my entrapment? And what would be the accountability that I'm willing or really should take in order to try and get love back in my life? Because you're really pretty alone when you first come out of the tailspin. And we don't do life alone well. So I don't have some grand and glorious way to finish except to celebrate that this holiday notion. We're a Passover family, right? We're getting together at this place. We do this every Sunday, and we come together and we tell stories, we laugh at one another, and we remember that this is a place where God brought us out of captivity. Over and over and over again, people are saved and rescued from misery and slavery. And that's an amazing truth. So let us seek to be reconciled with one another and go forth in freedom in this and every day. Thanks.